Right, it's 6 o'clock and we'll begin our class tonight. Sometimes Matt leads a song before we get started, but I got quite a bit of material tonight, so we're going to go right into the class and go from there. You may wish you had a song or three, but we'll go ahead and get started in our class. We're going to continue our study of Egypt, Jordan, and Israel. We've completed our look at the sites that we were to visit in Egypt and have been talking about sites in Jordan for the last couple of weeks. Today we're going to finish our look at Jordan and cross over the Jordan River into Israel, where the remainder of this study will focus. For people that were going on this trip, there were many reasons for people wanting to go. I know that Lisa Richardson, she really wanted to see the pyramids. That seemed to be the thing that she wanted to see the most. I know Scott Miller, he was going because he wanted to climb Mount Sinai, or at least climb a mountain, whether it was Sinai or something else. But that was what he really wanted to do when he went over there. Paul, he wanted to see St. Catherine's Monastery and Hatzor. And I know those were two things that were really high on Paul's list of things to see. For me, it was one of the places Bob talked about last week, and I wanted to stand on Mount Nebo. I wanted to see what Moses saw before he died. I wanted to see what his viewpoint of the land of Canaan was. And that was one thing that really interested in me. Secondly, I wanted to see an area that's in the northern part of Jordan that we're going to talk about today. And that's going to be, we're going to explore the area of Qas. And you're probably wondering, Qas, I don't remember reading about that in the Bible. Well, you didn't. But you did read about it by another name, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. And so going from Qas, then we're going to go to the Jordan River, and finally the archaeological site of Bethshan. Had we been able to go on our trip, we would have started this day in Amman. Now, last week I viewed his class this afternoon. He mentioned that this was going to be a very long day, with the travel from Petra and visiting the other sites. And I probably confused Bob a little bit because I gave him some sites. Not all those occurred on the same day of our travels. We would have gone from Petra, which is about a 4.5-hour drive, and would have ended our day in Amman, Jordan. The next day we would have left Amman, Jordan, and we would have gone to Mount Nebo and to, what was the monastery there, Bob? The one with the... St. John's. Yeah, St. George's, St. John's, some saint. And with the mosaic tile floors and the map on the tile floors. And from there, we would have gone to Jaresh that Bob talked about last week. But after leaving Jaresh, we would have continued on to Qas, crossed over the Jordan River into Israel, visited Bethshan, and finally ended our day in Tiberias on the Sea of Galilee. This day probably would have been our longest day because there were several sites to see, and you're making a border crossing from Jordan into Israel, and there would have been a little time involved in there. Once crossing the border, it probably wouldn't have been too bad. So on the slide that you see on the screen, the name Qas may not immediately mean much to you. In developing the itinerary for this trip, I knew where I wanted to go. And I knew the Bible name of the area, but I had never heard of the modern name of Qas. Qas is the name of a town close to the ruins of the New Testament town of Gadara. Now, the name Gadara may ring a bell with you. If you recall, it is the area where Jesus encountered a demoniac whom Jesus healed and cast out the demons. Qas is in the extreme northwest corner of Jordan, close to the borders of Israel and Syria. It's about 68 miles northwest of the Jordanian capital of Amman. The ancient ruins, Roman ruins of Jerash, which Bob talked about last week, lie about halfway between Ammon and Kas. So we would have gone from Ammon to Jerash and then about another 30 miles to Kas in that area. Kas is elevated above the Jordan River in the Jordan Valley. And from Kas, you can see the Sea of Galilee. And I better get this turned on. Let's see. There it is. Thank you. So from Kas, because of its elevation, you can see the Sea of Galilee, the town of Tiberias located across the sea in Israel, and the southern end of the Golan Heights. So it's about like going to Rock City and seeing 7 states. You know, from there you can see 3 countries and several other landmarks around. And on a very clear day, you can faintly see Mount Hermon, which is well north of the Sea of Galilee, up close to the country of Lebanon and Syria, at the very tip of Israel. So let's see. The ruins of Kas are rather impressive, but not as impressive as the ruins of Jerash, but interesting to see nevertheless. In this slide, you can see an ancient amphitheater. It's not as grand as some other amphitheaters that you might find in the Middle East, but it is still quite amazing to see it standing mostly intact after almost 2,000 years. This is another picture from Kas. On top of the ledge or on top of the wall back in the background is a church. The church was probably built a few hundred years after the first century. The columns and the roads seen in the foreground could originate from earlier times. Interestingly, the ruins in Kas have been covered with dirt and sand over the centuries. At one time, most of this was under dirt and sand, and like a lot of archaeological digs, they've uncovered it over a period of years. And it was accidentally discovered during some of the recent wars between Israel and Jordan. And the Jordanian army even used some of the underground buildings that were covered with dirt and sand at the time as a field hospital for their wounded soldiers during that war. And I found that interesting. And then obviously after the war, sometime after that, then they started doing the excavating and uncovering of the buildings and structures that had been covered up. But at this time, I want to move on from what we can read in history books and turn to what we can read in the Bible. As I mentioned earlier, Kas was formerly known as Gadara. And the area of Gadara is mentioned in Matthew chapter 8, Mark chapter 5, and Luke chapter 8. And in today's class, we'll be looking at the passages in Mark. I should mention that the exact location where Jesus encountered the demoniac cannot be definitively proved. It was somewhere very close in that general area. In Mark and Luke, you will see the area called Gerasenes or Gadarenes, depending upon your translation. In Matthew, depending on your translation, it will be called Gadarenes or Gergesenes. Gerasa was a nearby fortified Roman city. And regardless of whether it was Gadara or Gerasa, we can know for certain that it was in Gentile territory because we read of swine occupying the pasture land. And it is not unusual for locations to be called by more than one name. If I were to ask you what country do we live in, what would you say?
We say America or United States of America or the U.S.
Yes, yeah, it can go by any of those names. And that's similar to what we find here. It was going by multiple names and probably called different things by different people. And Mark and Luke, it's possible that Mark and Luke were referring to the general area of Gerasa, while Matthew was referring to the specific town of Gadara. And it might be further mentioned that this general area east of the Jordan near the Sea of Galilee was also known as the Decapolis. And you would have read of the Decapolis in places in the Bible. So let's look at Mark chapter 5, and we'll start in verse 1. They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes, and when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with the unclean spirit. He lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him any more, not even with a chain. For he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but he wrenched the chains apart, and he broke the shackles in pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. There are many caves and tombs in the area in and around Gadara, and it is said that some Bedouins still use the caves and tombs for shelter. This demon-possessed individual was a tortured man, cast out of the city and bound with chains in an attempt to keep him contained. With no luck, he kept breaking out of the chains. They couldn't hold him down. So going on to verse 6. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him, and crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he was saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now a great herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him, saying, "Send us to the pigs, let us enter them." Can you see the struggle taking place within this man? He ran to Jesus as a man, as a person pleading for help. He ran to Jesus. At the same time, that unclean spirit that was within him says, "Leave him alone. We got him. He's ours." But Jesus had a plan for the man, for this demon-possessed man, and began to cast out the demons. And as they came out of the man, the demons pleaded with Jesus to let them enter the pigs feeding on the hillside. Why the pigs? Why did these demons want to go into the pigs? Because they were unclean? Okay. One unclean thing to another unclean thing? Okay.
The Jews didn't eat pork. That was one of the prohibitions in the Mosaic law. So I don't know if that has anything to do with it.
Well, your answer is probably as close as what I've got. So, but I think these unclean spirits realized what Jesus could have done with them. If you remember from reading in the book of Jude, they could be cast into prison, into darkness, and chained there. At least in the pigs, they had some limited amount of freedom, possibly. They didn't have to go to where they might be tormented themselves. And so maybe the pigs, they thought, this is the best option we've got that we can find. It doesn't seem like a good option, does it, Scott?
A little bit, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yes, that's right. That's right.
But does that really make sense since the pigs died?
The pigs did die.
Where they
Pardon?
where'd they go?
Well, we're going to read that. The Bible tells us. So let's go into verse 13. So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned in the sea. So I know in some places in the Caribbean you can swim with the pigs, but I don't think these were the swimming pigs, because it says they were drowned. Would you want to swim with pigs, Scott? No, I mean neither. So, did that answer your question?
Yes, because I thought I was talking about the swine, not the demons. When they went down into the,
Oh, the swine did go down in the sea and drowned.
and so did the demons, but
Yeah, the demons with the swine. Yeah, Yeah, the demons were piggybacking right into the sea. You like that? That was off the cuff. Umkais is not on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, and neither are the ruins of Gadara. Those locations are about 2 miles from the shoreline. And since the man met Jesus as soon as he stepped out of the boat, it appears they were not in Gadara proper, but close by. By declaring the pigs were on a hillside, it would seem the pigs were on the hillside above where Jesus and this demon-possessed man were standing. So there are some stiff shorelines there with cliffs going down into the sea. So if you were to visit that area, you could see how the pigs could have run right down into the sea and drowned. So, all right. So the pigs drowned. Going into verse 14. The herdsmen fled and told it in the city and in the country, and people came to see what it was that had happened. And they came to Jesus and saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had the legion, sitting there clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs, and they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region. Can you imagine how shocked the men herding the pigs were? Here, you had 2,000 pigs. They were probably, rooting around whatever pigs do. And then all of a sudden, they make a mad dash to the Sea of Galilee and jump in. And they may have come back up eventually, but they drowned. And so no wonder these herders rushed to the city to tell the townspeople what had happened. And they didn't want to be held responsible for the calamity before Jesus could leave. We want the townspeople to see who did this. It wasn't us, it was someone else. And the people in the city must have thought they were being told a tall tale, that their 2,000 pigs had drowned in the sea, and this crazy man who lived in the tombs was now sane. How incredible was that? They had known this man for a long, long time. He had a reputation and wasn't a good one. But once the townspeople verified the truthfulness of the herdsman's story, they began to plead with Jesus to leave. I can imagine their thoughts was that Jesus could do this to a herd of 2,000 pigs. What can he do to us? They were ready. You go away. They were a very superstitious people to start with in that time, with all the many gods that they had, and they thought, this person here, he must be the real deal. We need to get him out of here because he may put us in another herd of pigs and send us down. So verse 18, as he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with the demons begged to him that he might be with him. And he, Jesus, did not permit him, the healed man, but said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." And he, the formerly demon-possessed man, went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone marveled. As Jesus prepared to leave, he had come and accomplished what he wanted to. This formerly demon-possessed man begged Jesus to let him come with me. If I had been possessed by a demon for many, many years and was living in the tombs, unclothed, rejected by everybody that was there, I'd want to come to the one that made me whole too. And that's what this man wanted. And it sounded like the kind of person Jesus would have wanted to have with him. Here's a man that could tell a great story of how God had healed him. But he told the man to stay and tell others what God had done for him. And verse 20 tells us this is exactly what the man did. And if this is where the story ended, it would be great, but I don't believe it does end here. So we're going to go over to Mark chapter 8 and read verses 31 through 37. Verse 31, Jesus had been away for a little while, and he had been traveling to other parts, but he had come back into this area, and that's where we picked up here. And then he returned from the region of Tyre, and he went through Sidon to the Sea of Galilee in the region of the Decapolis. I mentioned the Decapolis earlier. Decapolis means 10 cities. So within this region, there would have been 10 cities along with some smaller villages. Gadara was one of those 10 cities. And one of the more well-known cities of the Decapolis is Damascus, which is one of the oldest cities in the world. And as you know, it's the capital of Syria. And it's the same city where Saul had planned to arrest and persecute Christians, and the city where Saul became a Christian after meeting Jesus on the road to Damascus. So that's Decapolis. That's where Jesus is at this point. And they, the townspeople, brought to him a man who was deaf and had got off the map. So here we got Gadara up there, and that's the Decapolis that's sort of in that red circle, red oval there. And so it reaches up into Syria and reaches down into Jordan. All of it is in Gentile territory, but this is where Jesus has returned to. And so now we'll continue with our reading in verse 32. And they brought to him a man who was deaf and had a speech impediment, and they begged him to lay his hand on him. And his ears were opened, and his tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. And Jesus charged them to tell no one, but the more he charged them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. And they were astonished beyond measure, saying, "He has done all things well. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak." I don't know how much time had elapsed between the time that Jesus healed the demon-possessed man in Mark chapter 5 and the time of the healing of this deaf man in Mark chapter 8. It's not certain that Jesus returned to the exact same place. But since the formerly demon-possessed man went throughout the Decapolis sharing what Jesus had done for him, I suspect many, if not most of the people in that area were aware of what Jesus had done on his previous visit.
That is the wrong chapter and verse.
Mark 7.
Is it Mark 7? Thank you.
You're welcome, Fred.
Mark 7, for those of you that are watching online. Thank you. So, again, I don't know how much time had elapsed there. And, yeah. So the Gentiles living in the Decapolis area were fearful of Jesus on his first visit. You know, they begged him, leave us, get out of here. You just killed our 2,000 pigs. You know, we're afraid what you can do to us. But this time they seem to have gladly received him, even declaring he has done all things well. And you would expect that this man who had been healed from his demon possession to have had a lasting influence on his neighbors. Now, if Jesus had left and he returned to that same state that he was in previously, then all of Jesus' credibility would have been gone. But this man was healed, permanently healed of this possession. It also seems that this man's life, being of sound mind and everything, would also help spread the gospel in the Gentile areas around Judea. Jesus had sowed the seed. The healed man probably did some watering. In this instance, and so many more found in the Bible, God was able to use the most unlikely person possible to advance the cause of Christ. And to me, this is an encouraging lesson that he can take someone that's of little value, and sometimes I feel like I'm of little value, but I believe that God can use each of us in his service, just as he made this man here valuable in his service. It's one reason why I had hoped to see it. Now we're going to leave Gadara and Umkais, and we're going to go to the Jordan River. The Jordan River, the not so mighty, often muddy Jordan River. And those of you that went on the previous trip to Israel and saw the Jordan River, I wasn't too impressed. I probably would have been just impressed with the Stones River down the road here. On the screen, there are a few bullet points about the Jordan River. I hope you can read those. As you can see on the map, the Jordan River serves as a natural border between Israel and the country of Jordan. There are 2 border crossings across the Jordan River, and they're denoted by the bright red dots on the river. The lower crossing is the Allenby Bridge, which is very close to where we stopped to worship on a Sunday 4 years ago. The second crossing, the Sheikh Hussein Bridge, is up further north, closer to the Sea of Galilee. And it's that northern crossing we would have made in leaving Jordan and entering Israel. And one benefit to using the northern border crossing is that you would have crossed over directly into Israel. The southern border crossing takes you into the Palestinian West Bank. And it still would have been safe to have used the Allenby Bridge border crossing before things got ugly in Gaza, but it is one less checkpoint to encounter by using the Sheikh Hussein Bridge. You don't have to go from Jordan through Palestinian territory and then into Israel. You just go from Jordan to Israel. The Jordan River is 156 miles long. In comparison, the Stones River is said to be 40 miles long. The Cumberland River is 688 miles long. The Nile River is 4,130 miles long. So it's not a very long river, but it's what they have. The Jordan River is not the river it used to be. The amount of water flow in the Jordan today is much less than it was back in biblical times. And that's due to overuse by both Israel and Jordan. A lot of water is siphoned out of the Jordan River to irrigate the farmlands. It's also used for water supply, but it's not their sole source for water supply. They desalinate a lot of water out of the Mediterranean. And there's not much aquatic life in the Jordan River as it has been polluted by industrial plants. There's a lot of chemical plants and other heavy industry there. But all that said, that's enough information on the modern day river. The Jordan River is mentioned 17 books of the Old Testament and all 4 gospel accounts in the New Testament. There's a well-known song that we sing about the Jordan River that we've sung in the past. Any ideas? Songs about the Jordan River? Yes. On Jordan's stormy banks I stand and cast a wish why. And there's another song that mentions the Jordan River. You know what that one is? It's probably not in our book. Swing low, sweet chariot, with I looked over Jordan and what did I see? Coming for to carry me home. You remember that one? Okay. So much for my singing. So many memorable events occurred at the Jordan River. So what are some biblical events that you can recall from Scripture that regard the Jordan River? Israelites, they crossed the Jordan River, yes. John the Baptist baptized people in the Jordan River. Naaman dipped 7 times in the Jordan River and was cleansed of leprosy. Moses was not allowed to cross the Jordan River. Elijah, remember Elijah taken up into heaven in a fiery chariot of fire near the Jordan River after he'd crossed over. You mentioned John the Baptist baptizing people in the Jordan River. Jesus was baptized in the Jordan River. Now, the biblical account that intrigues me the most is the healing of Naaman. although other notable events would have been equally compelling to discuss further. So let's look at 2 Kings chapter 5, beginning in verse 1. Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master and in high favor, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was a mighty man of valor, but he was a leper. Now the Syrians on one of their raids had carried off a little girl from the land of Israel, and she worked in the service of Naaman's wife. And she said to her mistress, "Would that my Lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." In verse 4, we would read that Naaman took the word of a young Jewish female servant, and he requested permission of the king to go to Israel to seek healing. If you had leprosy, I suppose you would be desperate to try anything to get rid of the disease, even taking the advice of what generally would be considered an insignificant servant girl. In verse 5, the king not only gave Naaman permission to go to Israel, but he also sent a large amount of gifts for Naaman to take with him. We'll jump down to verse 8. But when Elisha, the man of God, heard the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent to the king, saying, "Why have you torn your clothes? Let him now come to me, that he may know that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman came with his horses and chariots and stood at the door of Elisha's house. And Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, "Go wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh will be restored, and you shall be clean." Elisha gave Naaman concise instructions on what he had to do to be cleansed of his disease. Wash in the Jordan River 7 times. How simple and how inexpensive could it be? You would think that any person would have made a mad dash to the Jordan River to do as Elisha had instructed, but I would suspect that more people than you would think would look at these simple instructions suspiciously. He's sending me to the Jordan River to dip 7 times? No. But furthermore, this shows the wisdom of Elisha and his desire for God to receive the glory. Had Elisha performed some elaborate gesturing in curing Naaman, Naaman would have given praise and glory to Elisha for his miraculous cure. Instead, Elisha put time and distance between him, Naaman, and the Jordan River to show that it was God who would perform the miracle. That was Elisha's intent. You go over there and you do this and you'll be healed. But let's see what Naaman did. But Naaman was angry and went away, saying, "Behold, I thought he would surely come out to me and stand and call upon the name of the Lord his God, and wave his hand over the place and cure the leper. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean?" So he turned and went away in a rage. The Abana and Pharpar rivers probably were cleaner than the Jordan, but if Naaman had dipped himself in those rivers, he would have only got wet. Verse 13. But his servants came near and said to him, "My father, it is a great word the prophet has spoken to you. Will you not do it? Has he actually said to you, 'Wash and be clean'?" So he went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God. And his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. Once again, if it was not for Naaman's servants, likely Naaman would return to Syria, still with his leprosy. It was his servants that convinced him to do as Elisha had asked for. It is his servants that showed greater wisdom than Naaman himself. And after coming out of that muddy water of the Jordan River, Naaman's skin was like that of a little child. Now Naaman he had gratitude, and he returned to, if you need to take communion, it's available down the hall there. But Naaman returned to Elisha to offer him the gifts that he had brought. But Elisha refused to take them. Elisha didn't want to be paid for doing the work of God like this. So let's go down to verse 17. Well, there's a little more in between that. His servant, he thought, well, my master Elisha doesn't want these gifts, but I would like them. And once he got the gifts, Elisha knew what had happened. And his servant, that leprosy that was on Naaman, went to his servant then. Poor decision on his servant's part. Poor decision. Verse 17, Naaman came back and said, if not, please let there be given to your servant 2 mule loads of earth. For from now on your servant will not offer burnt offering or sacrifice to any god but the Lord. It appears Naaman finally realized the power of God, although he did not thoroughly understand all there was to know about the nature of God. And one would have to believe that Naaman had previously gone to one of the gods of Syria, probably many of the gods of Syria, seeking to be cured, but to no avail. And now that he'd been cured by the God of the Israelites, it was this God he wanted to worship. In our discussion of Umkas, we mentioned how unlikely it was for a demon-possessed man to become influential in leading others to Christ. In this account, we find a lowly servant girl boldly suggests that her master seek the help of Elisha, the prophet of God. Watching my time here. There's one more Jordan event that I would like to briefly touch on before moving on to Beth-Shan, and it is the baptism of Jesus. Found in all 4 gospel accounts, let's read from Mark chapter 1, 9 through 11. In those days, Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. And when he came up out of the water, immediately he saw the heavens being torn open and the Spirit descending on him like a dove. And a voice came from heaven, "You are my beloved Son, with you I am well pleased." There are several reasons why I wanted to talk about Jesus' baptism as it relates to the Jordan River. One, unlike Naaman, Jesus had no problem being immersed in the Jordan River, muddy or not. That's what he did. Jesus was willing to make the 80-plus mile trek from Nazareth to the Jordan River to be baptized. This is 80-plus miles walking, not riding. Second, his baptism in the Jordan River marks the beginning of his ministry. By his obedience to God and being baptized, Jesus declared to all that God declared that to all that Jesus is his beloved Son. Third, in the eyes of the vast majority of people, Jesus, like the demoniac and the servant girl, was the most unlikely person to be the Son of God. So unlikely that most did not or would not believe that Jesus was God's Son, even after witnessing the miracles and hearing his teachings. After all, this Jesus was the son of a carpenter, they thought, and there was shame attached to his birth. Not someone that we'd probably go out and pick. But unlike the demoniac and the servant girl, Jesus was not only the best hope for mankind, but he was also and is the only hope for mankind. So as we move to the close of this class, let's spend the remaining time looking at the town of Beth-Shan. Beth-Shan, it seems a little unusual to us, but it has multiple spellings, like a lot of other things you read in the Bible. Even within the same translation, it may be called different things. When I started planning the trip itinerary, the different spellings were rather confusing to me. I've used several different websites to determine what locations would be interesting to visit. At times, I didn't know if I was looking at the same location or different locations, because different people called the same place by different names. Beth-Shan is not the only town to have multiple spellings. And I found that Google Maps was becoming a good friend. It was generally pretty forgiving on spelling. And early in the class, I mentioned that we would have used the Sheikh Hussein border crossing transiting from Jordan into Israel. Beth-Shan is about 5 miles west of this border crossing, so it is very close to the kingdom of Jordan. And prior to the 1948 war, when the Jewish state of Israel declared its independence, Beth-Shan's population was about 67% Arab Muslim, 30% Jews, and 3% Christian. When Israel took control of Beth-Shan, the Arab Muslims fled to Jordan and Syria, and the Christians tended to flee to Nazareth. And the property that they abandoned was seized by the Israelis. Today, the population is about 20,000 inhabitants, with about 97% being Jewish. Israel has a lot of agriculture, but I was surprised when I saw that cotton was one of the crops there in Israel. And then after I read that, I seemed to remember that maybe I had bought a shirt one time that said it was made in Israel, and I thought, well, that's odd. I'd never seen a shirt made in Israel before. A lot of Southeast countries and South American countries, but not Israel. So it must have been a cotton shirt. I don't know. Biblically, the main claim to fame for the story associated with Beth-Shan has to do with the deaths of King Saul and his son Jonathan. All right, we're not going to get there. King Saul was commanded to destroy the Amalekite nation. He was instructed to put to death every man, woman, and child and all the livestock. Nothing was to be taken, nothing was to be saved. And while you may have questions about the instructions, that's not the point of the lesson. The point is that God had given Saul specific instructions to carry out, and Saul did otherwise. And instead of destroying everything of the Amalekites, he captured Agag and brought back the best of the oxen instead of killing him and killing the sheep and killing the oxen as God had commanded. And when Samuel confronted Saul, Saul started making excuses, none of which justified his disobedience to God. One verse that we read quite often is, I'll read this. Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to listen than the fat of rams. Saul may have thought he had a better plan, but it wasn't God's plan, so it was the wrong plan. And so I'm going to skip through these verses, but it's in 1 Samuel 15, and we'll go through that. Let's see. I want to go back. Trying to find my bearings here. So Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned, I have transgressed. And anyway, he says, I will not return with you. He said, you've rejected the word of the Lord has rejected you. He even went to a medium asking for Samuel's spirit to be raised from the dead. Samuel was not real happy about being aroused, it appears. And he furthermore told Saul that, listen, not only is the kingdom going to be ripped from your hand tomorrow, you're going to be dead, you and your sons. And that's exactly what happened. So the next day when the Philistines came to strip the slain, they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. There we are. So they cut off his head and stripped off his armor and sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to carry the good news to the house of their idols and the people. And they put his armor in the temple of Ashtaroth, and they fastened his body to the walls of Beth-Shan. And if you made the climb the last time, you may have seen some walls up there. Don't know that those are the same walls, but you can just picture Saul and Jonathan and the brothers, up there. But when the inhabitants of Jabesh-Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, they went and took the body of Saul's and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Beth-Shan, and they came to Jabesh and burned them there. And they took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree in Jabesh and fasted for 7 days. Even after death, Samuel proved to be a true prophet of God. Saul and his sons were indeed killed the following day. And you can see the ruins atop of Bethshan there. These are the Roman ruins down at the bottom of the hill. The hill in the background is what contains Bethshan on the top. And some very impressive ruins in Israel there. More pictures, just a variety of pictures. And this is the last picture. This is the view from the top of Bethshan looking down over the Roman ruins. And those ruins at the bottom, obviously they wouldn't have existed in the days of Saul and Samuel. And these were built by the Romans many centuries later. Another thing I found interesting, and I'm going to close with this, Bethshan wasn't open for tourism till the 1990s. They were slow to getting around to the tourism thing. But I'm glad we got to see that 4 years ago. Maybe we'll get to see it again sometime. We'll see. Thanks for being here tonight.